Today's lesson is just going to be finishing off the working memory model. So we did that last lesson, you've gone through the AO1, so the description for it, but now we're going to do the evaluation and then do a little bit of exam practice. So all you should have left to do in those pages is some recap on KF case study, and then we should have the AO3 evaluation PECs to do. So you'll need to either be able to see the booklet. If you're writing your notes separately, just make sure you can see it so you know how it's laid out and things like that. If you are typing into it, that's absolutely fine, but you will also need another piece of paper or another worksheet that you can write your answers onto the 2 exam questions we are going to do. So let's have a little bit of a recap. This is our working memory model, as you know, and we went through it in detail last lesson, but just as a quick recap, at the top we've got our central executive, and that is the one that's in charge. This is the one that decides what information should be passed to which slave system. We've got our phonological loop, which in short is all about the hearing and the inner ear and the inner voice. You've got your visuospatial sketchpad, which tells you the orientation of things, the colour of things, essentially your eyes inside of your brain, if you like to think of it like that. And then the episodic buffer is sort of like a temporary store that holds information whilst the other slave systems are too full to deal with things. Helps a bit with the problem solving. And all of these help transfer to a long-term memory. So that's our very quick recap. You've done it in more detail. Make sure you refer back where you need to. So on page 16 of your booklets, there is a KF page and it says link KF to each of the models below, stating whether he supports or goes against the model with your reasoning. So pause it here. You've got the multi-store model of memory, the working memory model, and then you've got to say what ethical considerations need to be made for a patient like KF. So pause it here, try and fill those in before we go through. So KF goes against the multi-store model of memory because the multi-store model of memory states that short-term memory is unitary, there's only one type. But we know, or it can be seen through KF, that there are 2 different types, as he can't remember auditory information or things that are read to him, but he can recall things that he reads himself. That in turn means that he supports the working memory model. If he cannot recall things that are said to him, his phonological loop is what is damaged, whereas his visuospatial sketchpad is intact. So it supports the working memory model as it shows that short-term memory is not unitary, there are different types. What ethical considerations need to be made for patients like KF? There are quite a few. Now there is obviously some issues with KF's short-term memory, but only certain parts of it. So there are a few options. You've got to ensure confidentiality is maintained, like he's called KF, we don't know his full name. You've got to make sure that they are protected from harm. So whether that means that you write everything down because KF can recall things that he reads himself, or you have another adult present that can act as an agent really for KF and say, this is too distressing, we should stop here, this is too much, they're too tired. That will go the same for consent. You'd have to get somebody else to consent for him to be able to take part, or write everything down because he can recall that. So there are a few options, but generally for patients or people that have got issues with their memory, another person might be the one that can consent for them, can withdraw for them, and so on. So a bit of evaluation then. I want you to pick 2 from here. It's entirely up to you which 2 you pick, and remember this is for the working memory model. So you could go for supporting evidence from KF. Like you've put on the previous page, shows that short-term memory is not unitary. You could also go for supporting evidence through dual task performance studies. So the dual task performance by Badley we did last lesson, you should be able to use that as supporting evidence because it shows that different stores can only maintain one activity at a time fully. And then the third one you could choose is supporting brain scans because we've got Braver found that when participants were completing tasks that involved the central executive in a scanner, the left prefrontal cortex was the most active. And when the task increased in difficulty, there was much more activity in this area. So with that one, you could link to the fact that it's more objective. there is less bias, and it shows that the central executive is taking in all of the information and is working very hard in a scientific manner. So pause it here, pick 2, use your notes, have a look back through at dual task and at KF in more detail, pick the 2 you're going to go for. Now we've got your weaknesses. There's only 2 of these. First one is there is a lack of clarity over the central executive. Badley says that it's the most important, but its role is essentially to gather and distribute information. We don't know much more than that. And if it's the most important part of the working memory, we should know more than we do. So there's a lack of clarity over it. And the second weakness, the use of lab experiments or case studies. Don't use both, pick either lab experiments or case studies. And what the weaknesses are of those. So if you pick lab experiments, it'll be the dual task performance. What are the issues with that? And if you pick case studies, it's KF. Think specifically about labs and then link back to Badley's dual task, or think specifically about the issues with case studies. Just make sure that you are being detailed, you're not just using your comments as one sentence, this is a weakness, and that's it. Why is that a weakness? Why is it important that we know about this? So make sure you are focusing on your comments. If you can counter argue, try to as much as you can to make it more of a discussion, but pause it here and put in your PECs. So we're going to have a little bit of exam practice now. There are 2 questions overall, so this is question 1, A and B. I'm going to go through it with you, but I want you to time yourself as well, so I will show you the mark schemes and stuff like that. But the first question, a researcher investigated the working memory model using lab experiment. 40 students from a local college volunteered to take part. In condition A, 20 students performed the following 2 tasks at the same time, mentally counting backwards from 100 and tracking coloured shapes on a computer screen. In condition B, 20 different students performed the following 2 tasks at the same time, mentally counting backwards from 100 and reading a poem out loud. The researcher predicted that the performance of the students in condition A would be better than the performance of the students in condition B. So question 1A is name 2 components of the working memory model that would be involved in the performance of the tasks in condition A. So what would be the store for mentally counting backwards from 100? What would be the store for tracking coloured shapes on a computer screen? 2 marks. Briefly explain 2 ways in which the working memory experiment described above could be improved. So is there any way that this could be changed, made different to make it a better study? So it's 6 marks, you get 9 minutes, time yourself, try not to use your notes, see how you get on. Right then, let's go through the mark scheme. If you've got a different colour pen, do it in that. If not, just make sure you put a star next to what you needed to change, give yourself a bit of a mark really. So mark scheme for question A, you get 1 mark for each. A few different options really. So mentally counting backwards from 100, you could have just gone for the phonological loop, or you could have said the phonological store, doesn't matter. Tracking coloured shapes on a computer screen, visuospatial sketchpad. Now there is a few different options there, especially with the second one. Some variations of the model do call them different things depending on where you get it from, but we are visuospatial sketchpad. You could have had the InnerScribe or the visual cache, doesn't matter. They are the 2 subtypes of the visual spatial sketchpad. The top one I gave the phonological loop. They will allow phonological store as well. 1 mark for each because it just says name. You don't need any more than that. Don't justify. Remember, we need to know our command terms. Just a couple of words for each maximum. Now you've got B. Now it's 4 marks. You need 2 different ways. So you get 2 marks for each. So possible improvements. You could have said improve the sampling method. So they could have made it stratified to make sure it's more representative of the target population. You could have said changing the design. So use repeated measures or matched pairs and say how to reduce the amount of individual differences. You could have said change the tasks because they are too fake, so make them a bit more reflective of real life, like reading emails while talking on the phone. That would be something you would ordinarily do. You could say change the type of experiment, so you could make it a field study and carry it out in a more natural setting like a classroom, or you could say participants should be randomly allocated. You need 2, so it's 2 marks for each. Simply naming it isn't enough, that's 0. If you've done it in a quite limited way, so for example, we should change the nature of the task by making it a field experiment, that's limited. But by making it a field experiment by placing the participants in a classroom where they would normally be, to make it more realistic, that would be more clear. So try and give yourself a bit of a mark for that one. And the last question we're going to do is a recap on design a study. Now we did this earlier on in the year. We didn't do it in a lot of detail, but we have had a few practices at it. So I'm going to give you this first, and I want you to pause it and give yourself a plan. Then I'll go through a brief plan with you, and then I want you to write it using the plan or using yours, whichever you think works best. So the question is, you have been asked to conduct a study on whether exercise can increase the capacity of the short-term memory. You've decided to recruit participants who will do a memory test followed by 20 minutes of exercise and then another memory test. In your answer, include details of your sampling method, the controls you will put in place, ethical considerations, and how data will be presented. I want you to plan it on your own first, and I'll go through it with you. I want you to remember that for each bullet point, you must outline what you're going to do, justify your reasoning, and then give strength and a weakness. You need to acknowledge that that might not be the best way to do it, but you're satisfied with it. So give it a pause, and then we'll go through. So let's have a look at some ideas. First one, sample. Outline, I've gone for a volunteer sample. I'll put posters in a gym describing briefly the study and ask participants to meet in reception at a given time and date. The justification for putting it in a gym is that participants should be able to complete the 20 minutes of exercise that will be required and will have knowledge that they will have to do that. A strength of it is that they will take the study more seriously and be motivated to take part because they have seen it, they've said yep, and turned up at the specific time. But the weakness, we may only get a small sample size. Now obviously this is a very brief framework. This is not good enough to be just like that. You have to make it full sentences, be more specific. So what time will you ask them to meet in the gym? Is that peak time? Participants should be able to complete the 20 minutes of exercise. Why? What type of exercise are you going to make them do? Are you going to tell them that? So be a little bit more specific. Controls, I've just gone for one, which will be I will control the difficulty of the second memory test. Justification is you can't use the same test the second time around as it will be likely to remember because of rehearsal, but it needs to be the same difficulty so that the two lists can be compared. So strength, it's got higher validity as we will be actually testing the capacity of memory because it won't be able to be rehearsed, but the words may be too difficult to remember generally if the participant isn't familiar with those terms. So we need to ensure that these aren't obscure words, they're quite common, but they're not a different difficulty. You need to make sure that we've got the same amount of words in list 1 as list 2. Maybe around the same topic, just make sure they're not the same words because that will lead to rehearsal, which will lead to different results than we should get. Ethics, I've gone for I will gain informed consent by. So how are you going to do it? Now the question you've got to ask yourself is how much information you want to give them. Do you want to tell them they are testing whether it will be improved afterwards? You might gain demand characteristics. But you need to tell them what type of things they're going to do to get them to agree, especially with the exercise. So it's important that participants are aware of the type of exercise that they are required to complete. You might decide you need someone to be able to run on a treadmill for 20 minutes continuously at a pace of 8 kilometers per hour. Some people might not be able to do that, and they need to know what they are agreeing to before they do it. So we need to give them that information. That means that participants aren't likely to pull out at some point during the exercise, so they're not likely to get halfway through and go, this is too hard, I'm not doing it. But we might gain the demand characteristics like we've said, so you need to think about it carefully. And then the last one is the presentation of data. My advice for this bit would be to draw a graph with full labels. You can draw graphs and tables in your designer study and still get marks for it as long as you provide some kind of justification afterwards. So I draw a graph of the mean score before exercise, the mean after exercise. Justify why are you using the means, because it takes into consideration all of the results. And then just say that it provides an easy comparison to understand. That's a strength of presenting your data on a bar chart. But a weakness is that it doesn't tell us if the data is significant or not. Remember, you need to include all 4 bullet points, and you need to make sure you're giving a strength and a weakness of each and justifying exactly why you are doing it. These are just some ideas. Your plan might make more sense to you. You might still have a strength and a weakness in there, and that's fine. You might have just gone for a different ethical issue or a different control. That is absolutely fine. But I want you to give it a go of writing it up, and then just take a photo as usual and send it on. So have a go, use your notes, try and make it a nice perfect answer for me. And that's everything. Lesson 3 will be to do a model answer for a 16-mark question. So all I need you to do is make sure that you are very comfortable with the models of memory and you know what they're all about. But for now, keep on doing little bits of revision, keep on going, speak to you soon.